All right, so good evening, everyone. So welcome back to another segment with the Black History Project. As you know, I am AK, and we had the opportunity last week to kind of talk about African Americans in labor. So today I have one of my other colleagues on who's also from the Black History Project, and I will allow him to introduce himself for our dynamic talk tonight and let us know about a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it's important to you and what you want to talk about. So I'll yield the floor to you.
I appreciate it, my brother. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin. I am a teacher with the Black History Project. I'm also a teacher for my day job. 17 years, been in the system. Have taught everything social studies you can teach in social studies, from psychology to world history. I've been teaching U.S. history the last 10 years, almost, give or take, and also African American history for the last 5 or 6. I'm also a facilitator for the school board, training teachers on African American history education, particularly as the new laws and the new standards have come down from the state of Florida. I've also worked with the state of Florida's African American History Task Force, doing trainings for that as well. So, certainly Black Studies, Africana Studies, diversity, equity, inclusion programming is close to my heart.
For sure, for sure. And so, we're talking about, I can't really keep up. The person who works in politics is the person who is kind of on the forefront of teaching as well. And all of the outcomes with the administration and what's been happening. I know you said you wanted to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's just kind of like, well, where in the world do you start? Because things are moving so quickly.
For
Just
sure.
like I know we talked beforehand, the news just came out about Trump essentially saying that schools have 14 days, 2 weeks, to get rid of all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, or they won't receive any federal funding.
Right.
So, what the heck is going on, and why is this happening?
The what's going on, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. What's going on? The why is it happening? We were talking about it earlier. I think we're all on the same page in terms of why this is happening. And this is America has a long history of sort of pushback towards progress. Whenever advancement takes place, equality, civil rights, things like that, there are those in the status quo, the powers that be, that feel they're directly affected, because in many ways they are directly affected by it. And so any forward movement, forward progress is always met with an equal amount of resistance. You can draw a direct line from lost cause teaching and rhetoric in the years after the Civil War and Reconstruction to anti-civil rights movement rhetoric during the 50s and 60s to anti-DEI today. You can draw a direct line through all of those. And so I think what we're seeing is essentially our generation's version of anti-civil rights, anti you know human rights. And that's the why. That's what's happening. To that end, we were talking about it earlier. One of the statistics I saw that wasn't surprising, but basically explains what this is if you look at the sort of exit polling of the most recent election, the biggest indicator, or the most distinct indicator of Trump voters, or the people who voted for Trump, was their position on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or just on race, generally speaking. Generally, people who see reverse racism or reverse discrimination as the primary form of discrimination these days, there's a direct correlation to the percentage of them being Trump voters, even more so than the economy. Even more so than the economy. People voted based on their perspective on race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is a push and a movement that has been going on, as we of course know, for years. Republicans have been sort of priming the pump for years with anti DEI rhetoric, and this is sort of the payoff towards that.
Yeah, and when you talk about DEI, like, and I know we were talking about framing what it actually is, and just removing the charged words,
Mm-hmm.
wording from it, the charged language, just like the whole thing with woke, and I don't want to veer off, but it's like these words become hyperbolic, used
Right.
in a hyperbolic matter,
Right.
and then people want to do away with it. But when you actually explore what the actual terminology was about, it is actually things that largely people agree with.
A hundred
And so,
percent.
like when you talk about Pew Research, when they were um, exploring and asking people, well, how do you feel about diverse workplaces? They were saying that 56% of people were saying that it's actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's only a small number of people who think that it's a bad thing. It's 16% being
Right.
that exact number.
Right.
And so it's like, well, who exactly are you trying to cater to, and what are we trying to get away from? When you have a large segment of the population that's saying that this is a benefit to the company,
Mm-hmm.
this is a benefit to morale, this is a benefit to furthering businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we trying to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion, and who exactly are we trying to exclude? Because all encompassing, you also exclude people with ADA who need
Right.
ADA compliances,
Right.
right? So yeah.
And that's such a profound statement, and there's so many different like layers and directions that you can take that statement, and you get it out the park. First and foremost, the concept of people, when you actually scratch the surface just a little bit and actually have conversations about actual policies and not just these charged words, you find that people are more alike than they are different, right? And you can do this with many different issues, not just DEI. The gun issue, right? You got pro Second Amendment advocates and people who believe in restrictions. I remember there was in the aftermath of the tragedy, which we just had the anniversary, Stoneman Douglas. Again, I'm a teacher in the school system, and so that's a near and dear issue. I remember what was it 7 years ago when it happened. Obviously, the issue around gun rights became a thing, even on the campuses. And there were several schools that decided to do student walkouts, student-led walkouts. The school that I work with is one of the schools, and the school that I work with just also happens to be a school that is in a neighborhood that's very sort of conservative, Second Amendment ish type, clientele. And when the students staged the walkout, um, you know, there was a counter protest and it became sort of violent. Administration had to shut it down. On the way back, the violence sort of continued or whatever, and I was asked to protect some of the students who were, counter protesting. And so, as I'm sort of standing in front of them, making sure that they don't get hurt or whatever, I'm talking to the students, and I'm like, "You can't believe that there's, should be no kind of, limits or restrictions on guns and things like that. Laws create a safe society type thing." And they're like, "Oh my God, no, absolutely, there should be limits and restrictions. They should, do this, and this, and this." And suddenly, we're having a conversation and laughing and so on and so forth. And my only sort of thought at this time is, my God, if you actually took some of these students that just 5 minutes ago you guys were about to bash each other's heads in, give them some pizza and a soda, sit them down, and actually have a conversation, they're going to come out best friends because they agree way more than they disagree. And that's literally what you were saying. So this is across the board. America is more in the middle than we are on the extremes, but it's the extremes that are the loudest voices, and those are the ones that people hear. That's the first
Right.
problem. The second problem is when you have I don't want to say a party, but when you have a group of people, a segment of people, politicians that play to the lowest sort of denominator, that play to the hatred of people, you are going to essentially fuel that hatred, and that hatred comes out in ways like this. As you said, most people are on board with, diver. For example, again, another example, as we were talking about, as a teacher, if you are a parent that has a student, or excuse me, a child that is on any kind of individualized education plan, IEP, or 504 plan, or anything along those lines, you cannot have a child be on those programs and be against diversity, equity, inclusion.
Mm.
two don't go together. Literally, what your child is accessing is the E in DEI. You are providing an equitable education for your child who has certain ADA disabilities, and we are providing tools to provide that equitable education. Those are the things that you're talking about when you break it down to people for 5 seconds and they actually think, it starts to make sense. People associate DEI with black because that is the message that's being pushed in a hateful way. But all DEI is, all it has ever been, is providing an equitable access to people that have not historically had equitable access. That concept, most people are on board with, on the same page with, because most people have that experience in their lives in some way, if not themselves, and somebody, some loved one, right?
Right.
This is what we're talking about. These are the conversations that are not being had and need to be had. But it's the those those aren't the conversations that are being had. Our better angels are not the ones leading this conversation.
Well, and to go to your point, so like why DEI even came about and why it was important was because of how African Americans, black people were not included in the workforce. They weren't included in contracts, whether government contracts, private contracts, businesses, as far as being large contractors, subcontractors. There was a gross discrepancy with the inclusion of African Americans, whether as employees or as business owners. So it does have its inception and growth out of the railroading and oppression and disinvestment of black
For
businesses,
sure.
right? But then it grew out and started to encompass and become an umbrella for so much more.
Right.
But it started with that because there was a need for it. And I know, I think it was John Kennedy who was the one who really started to first speak about that. And then, of course, it was supported by LBJ
Mm-hmm.
and kind of grew from there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was because these businesses were not supported. People were not able to go there. And to me, it's laughable when we move into a society that places the emphasis on meritocracy
Uh-huh.
and says that, yeah, people should be judged off of their abilities to do something, right? And it's like, well, sure, a meritocracy sounds great when it's actually implemented.
Right.
The problem was that back then
It
you were not judging people on their capabilities, abilities, and intelligence and all this that you say they should be judged off on, and you were discrediting people solely because of the color of their skin.
100%. 100%. And it goes literally to what we said earlier. This is the inevitable pushback of this meritocracy that is so, as you said, preached upon, has never actually been realized fully or implemented. It was a system in which white Americans benefited from laws that were written specifically for them. That's just the reality of the situation. It is what it is. This is on some woke, theology. This is literally, as you said, what Kennedy has said, what LBJ has said, what presidents have said, right? One of my favorite lines from John F. Kennedy is the night that he gave the speech. He gave the speech the night of Medgar Evers' assassination, and he says, "Those that that see it for what it is, essentially, are recognizing right as well as reality. You cannot have a country that is based on freedom and democracy and equality, and this is what you preach to the entire world, but then also discriminate the way you have." Matter of fact, this is it's interesting we're having this conversation because this is one of the conversations that I have in my classroom. According to the state,
They're gonna call it
according
CRT.
to the state standards, this is in the state standards. So anybody who's watching, first of all,
Yeah,
thank you for
yeah,
watching. Secondly, I can pull up the state standard for you. Okay.
yeah.
Um, one of the issues, one of the sort of dilemmas that America has had historically, but particularly in the 20th century, is that it has always, especially once we left our sort of isolation standing and became sort of a world leader, right? It has always been a country that has preached to the world that we are on the side of the angels. We are the beacon of freedom. We are the beacon of democracy. We are these things that you want to strive for, right? Bring me your towers,
Right,
your poor, your huddle masses type stuff, right?
right.
However, look at what we do to our minority populations. And I don't just mean African Americans, even though obviously we're talking mostly about African Americans. You can go from Native Americans to Japanese Americans, internment camps, things like that. And so our enemies throughout the 20th century always threw our own hypocrisy back in our face, always. So when we're fighting Nazi Germany in World War II, Nazi Germany is dropping leaflets in the middle of the war on African American soldiers, telling these African American soldiers, why are you fighting a war for a country that hates your guts, right? Just quit, walk away, surrender. Like they're using our own hatred against us, right? During the Cold War, the Soviet Union are making political cartoons, basically, saying, how dare you talk about how evil, you know, life is here in Russia. Have you been to Alabama lately? Right? They're making political cartoons of black people being lynched in Alabama as proof that this country that says that they are about freedom and democracy is not. And so, this is, matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why John F. Kennedy made that speech. In that same speech, the night of Mr. Evans' assassination, Kennedy also says, how can we say to the world, he says, we preach to the world that we are the beacon of freedom, and we mean it. But can we say to the world that this is the land of the free except Negroes? Right? So everything that you're saying, this is why diversity, equity, inclusion was implemented. In many ways, civil rights in general was implemented by force. It wasn't supported by the government initially. Kennedy didn't support it. This was something that he knew was a sort of bad look on America, and we have to do this. And so this is kind of, again, why we are where we are. We are seeing the inevitable response, the pushback to programming that America really didn't even want to implement in the first place.
Right, and then I think about what's that, the famous Baldwin Kennedy meeting.
Ah,
That happens, and you have all these people in the room. You have Lorraine Hansberry, you have Harry Belafonte,
yes.
of course James Baldwin, Kenneth Clark, and they're trying to sit down with Robert Kennedy to talk about why are you all taking so long to move forward on this justice. And what does Robert Kennedy tell them? Well, just wait. It takes patience. Patience? It's already been 400 plus years, and you're talking about patience? And they
Exactly.
told that room up.
Exactly. It's one of my favorite James Baldwin quotes or statement speeches. He was debating in, I want to say, 1964, 65, something like that. He was debating William Buckley, super conservative back in the day, and they were in Cambridge University. And so when he was making his point, Baldwin, he speaking of Kennedy, he says that Robert Kennedy made a statement, something to the effect of, in 40 years, we're making so much progress that, in 40 years, we could even see a black president. And you hear something like that and it's like, oh my God, he hit the nail on the head. 40 years later, it's Obama. Oh, wow. Like he was such a progressive, right? And Baldwin says, you hear a statement like that and you think that, you're saying something that, everyone would cheer and this is such a progressive thing. But he said that Kennedy was not in the barbershops of Harlem where that statement was met with scorn. He says, from the perspective of black people, you just got here. And you're already the attorney general with your brother as president. And here you are saying that one day, 40 years from now, if we're good, then maybe we can become president too. You know what I mean? And like that's sort of the audacity that we're talking about. And this is from a liberal, quote unquote, right?
Right.
The Kennedy family immigrated just shortly after the Civil War. So you're talking about, as a family, they had been in America for less than 100 years. Meanwhile, 1619. You get what I'm saying? And so that's the point that James Baldwin is making. There's so much truth to be dug through and uncovered. And I think, quite frankly, and I'm sure we're all kind of on the same page with this in this conversation, this is one of the number one things that is feared by certain people in power. Like, if we're going to call a spade for a quick second, that's what it comes down to. When you scratch the surface of this country, a lot of the claims that it makes doesn't match the historical reality. And when you educate someone on that, it leaves a lot of uncomfortable questions that a lot of people don't have answers to. and that's the effort to keep it hidden. That's where the effort comes from.
Yeah, I was talking to a class today, and we were talking about freedom of religion. So we're starting to talk about the Bill of Rights, and so reading the sentence explained to them. Well, the original forefathers fled their country to come to this country so that they can escape religious persecution,
Right.
so that they would have the liberties and ability to practice the religion that they wanted. But in the same breath, they then oppress and persecute another group of people, and they don't allow them to practice the same religion.
Right.
So it's like you're telling me one thing and doing another. You're hugging me with one hand and then stabbing me in the back with the other and telling me you love me.
Right. What
You
is
know,
rules for thee but not for me? Like it's that kind of thing. And unfortunately, again, this is what we're talking about. America unfortunately has a history of that. Having these conversations and promoting programs that can potentially provide fixes to these problems is not woke, it's not anti-American. In fact, it's the opposite. It's the most American thing that you can do, to take something that you know was wronged and make it right.
so let me jump in real quick because this is the perfect time for the James Baldwin quote. So you're talking about James Baldwin, and he says, "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually."
100%. I love that quote so much. I love that quote so much. One of the reasons why I love that quote so much is because this is something that I don't know what way to properly say it. It gets lost on people. I don't think it gets lost on people. People either it doesn't register with them, like legitimately doesn't register, or they've convinced themselves. But one of the things that I say all the time when it comes to America and that sort of thing, critiquing America in order to find our best selves. Um, as a friend or someone that is a significant other, someone who's close to you in your life, one of the number one requirements that you should have of that person who is close to you in your life, because they are close to you, is that person should always be honest with you. That is your the be tell me the truth. I don't need a yes man. I need a homeboy. I need a best friend. I need a wife. I need somebody to rock with me, sure, but also be real with me, right? We have a problem as a nation being real with ourselves. Period. And that's ultimately what James Baldwin is saying. Because I love this nation, I am being real with it. There are many things that you have done, America, that is great. And there are many things that you have done that has significantly impacted your own citizens. And I, because I love you, am telling you the truth about yourself. Right? And the crazy thing with that, AK, is that concept is not lost on people except when it is convenient for them to be lost, for it to be lost on people, right? So for example, I love this country. I love my founding fathers. They created this, great nation from nothing, and which is all true. Like, you're talking about a group of men who created an entire nation from scratch, right? Like, that is an incredible. Most people can't make their own dinner from scratch, bro. People are Uber eating, right? So, like, this is an incredible thing. But that same group of people collectively also own thousands of enslaved people, right? Like, both are true. And so, me pointing out this reality and saying that this is a complex situation where all of this needs to be included, because that reality creates a step-by-step process that leads to where we are today, which is why we need DEI programming. If that is not being honestly talked about and assessed, then you cannot move forward from that point. And you're talking about a country that has, if we are in a 12-step program, we haven't passed step one, right? Like, we have not admitted that we have certain problems. You're talking about a country that still probably waves the Confederate flag. You get what I'm saying? Like, from 150 years ago, we have not corrected any of these thought processes that we need to really be addressing. And
Some people still aren't honest why we even went to the Civil War, why we even had a Civil War. You
exactly.
people will say Southern heritage and they say for states' rights, and then you have to ask the question to make them think a little bit. Well, what were those state rights that
Right.
they were trying to protect?
Right. But and so there again is what we're talking about. This is where a basic sort of understanding, a basic conversation takes place. Facts cannot be disputed. They are what they are. The problem is we have done such a good job covering up and whitewashing and sanitizing. And because we've done that for so long, this again brings us back to our conversation on DEI programming. I can justifiably, realistically, in my mind, say that DEI is reverse discrimination when I have never been exposed to the backstory that has led us to this point, right? The history is being stripped away from people. It has always been that way, and it continues to be that way through anti-CRT and so on and so forth. So what we're again seeing is a direct line between all of it. All it takes is for you to simply do a 5 minute Google search to find out what the people at the time themselves said about the civil. One of the documents that I teach in my class is the Cornerstone speech. This is a speech from the Vice President of the Confederacy, a man named Alexander Stephens, where he literally says within the first paragraph, this new nation, the cornerstone of this new nation rests with the undeniable reality that slavery subordination is the black man's natural position. He is naturally inferior to whites. This is what our new nation is rested upon. Those are his words, damn near direct quote, right? And so if I am to believe, or excuse me, if I am to wonder why this war was fought, do I listen to some, excuse my language, some redneck in a bar, or do I listen to the literal vice president, second in command of the Confederacy, right? But that's the history that's being sanitized and scrubbed away and whitewashed. So it's hard for us to move forward and understand the purpose of DEI as a correction to all of that when we haven't been taught all of that. I just had a conversation, again, a part of the state standards. Please contact me if you are interested, and I will show you the standards on the lynching of Reuben Stacy. So lynching is, again, part of the state standards. You have to talk about how African Americans were physically discriminated against. And so the Reuben Stacy lynching, which takes place in 1935, for almost 50 years, went untalked about, undocumented. Archives are there. You can pull up to the Florida State Archives and see them. But if you don't know that it's a thing, you don't know. I don't know what I don't know, so I don't know to pull up something that I don't even know exists. The only reason it became a story again was in the 1980s. There was a historian who was writing about the history of Florida, and he came across this and suddenly put it on blast. So you're talking 50 years in which one of the most devastating lynchings, a lynching that the NAACP created flyers for and sent around the country. So it was nationally known at the time. This flyer makes it all the way around the world, internationally. Hitler himself hears about this stuff, right? And so that happens at the time, but then 50 years it disappears. And it just, stumbles in terms of coming back. This is the kind of sanitizing that we're talking about. It makes perfect sense that people who are anti-DEI, I don't mean the politicians who are pushing it, I mean the people that they are talking to gain the votes. It makes sense that they think this way, that as we said at the beginning, reverse discrimination is the indicator towards the supporters of certain parties. That makes sense when this kind of conversation has not been shared with you, or you've not participated in it. This kind of history has not been taught to you, and you don't know what you don't know. And so this ultimately is the problem that we're talking about. Where we are now, everything that we're discussing is the lead up to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like great points, and I think about that with this revisionist history, and essentially, or not even this understanding and full grasp of history. Like even talking about and questioning African Americans' abilities to do the work and be
Mm-hmm.
proficient at the work. When you look at the history of turmoil If you want to talk about Tulsa, Black Wall Street, which we only know of one Black Wall Street, but there were several.
Right.
You had Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina.
Right.
You know, so but the biggest, I'd say, like thorn in the side in their sides at the time was the success
Yes.
of African Americans. It was not an inability to accomplish. Every time there were successful communities, we talk about Tulsa, but there were 50 other counties and cities surrounding Tulsa that were affluent black cities. I had the opportunity to go to Tulsa and take some youth to Tulsa and go to the museum out there in Greenwood. And so it talked about these other 50 cities and towns, but these people were escorted out. They were burned out. They were chased out of these towns. They used the law. They used eminent domain. I was talking to my students about the highways. So I think it was up under Truman's administration, and how they ran highways through affluent African American communities.
Yeah.
So, but these are messages not delivered as to where it just says, well, yeah, they were feeble. They were living in Jim Crow backwoods on farmland with didn't have anything. It's like, do you know Tulsa had chartered airplanes?
Yeah.
Do you know Tulsa had whole bus companies? Do you know the success of these places in Durham, North Carolina, like I said, and you talk about even today, contemporary, you have Baldwin Hills, you got PG County, all these other places, but there has only been 2 times in this country that bombs have been dropped on U.S. soil. And both of those times were on black communities.
Yep.
Tulsa, and then you had the MOVE campaign. I think that was up in Philadelphia in the 80s where they blew up the apartment buildings.
Right.
And this is the response to the organization of African American communities. Now you go into the Rosewoods. You go into Ocoee, you go into these different places, Chicago, Red Summer, all of that. And all of these are affluent communities, and people came in and burnt them down. I'm reading MLK's book right now, the autobiography of MLK. They bombed this man's house at least 4 times, and I'm only on chapter 4?
Yeah.
They bombed this man's house over and over again. You pull in Malcolm X, and like you invoked the ancestor Medgar Evers in this as well. And it's like they have tried to terrorize these communities because of their success.
Right.
That is never communicated in our classroom. And I'll say this last thing. Another thing that's never communicated to our youth is the power that they have. Nobody talks about the Children's Crusade in Birmingham.
Yes.
2,000 kids go out, 8 to 18-year-olds, 1963, because the adults were tired. They were overwhelmed and defeated as far as them feeling like they were going to get the liberties that they have been fighting for as well. So they go to the youth, go to the football players, basketball players, cheerleaders, the SGA, presidents of the school, whoever had popularity, and say, hey, this is a future that you all have to inherit, that you all have to have kids grow up in. What are you going to do to contribute to your future? And them kids said, we going out there. We going to get on the front lines.
Right.
And so when you see those videos, because we talk about America being the moral epitome of the world, but it really showed a counter narrative to that. When you look at those videos and you see those dogs and you see the water hoses, but what they don't tell you, because it's always shown in black and white,
it was how recent it is.
It's how recent it is, and the fact that those were children, not adults.
Right. Hey, my brother, I don't even know where to begin with the jewels that you were just dropping. I mean, it's just all over the place. You're so profound, and it's interesting because so much of what you say are things that I share with my students in the classroom, particularly the African American Studies class, but even in the U.S. History class. Again, part of the curriculum through our Black student unions. One of the number one things, for example, that we talked about, and this is the second thing that you said, was the youth. The civil rights movement, and pretty much most movements in this country are youth-driven movements. King himself was 26, right, when bus boycott happened. So you're talking about youth-driven movements, the freedom rides, the sit-ins. These are all college kids, right? Like these are 19, 20, 21 year olds. From John Lewis to Diane. John was 23 years old when he's standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington. 23 years old, and he was the fiercest of all of them. They made homeboy change his speech because he was about to go in on everybody. You hear what I'm telling you? It's that youthful energy, and this is one of the things that I preach to the students all the time. Our students, and this is, again, connecting everything together. This is another one of the reasons why I really firmly believe this. One of the reasons why there's been such a concerted effort historically to deny the truth, particularly to our kids. When you're looking at the denial of equal, like, of knowledge, that is one of the sort of forefronts, the forerunners of denial of civil rights. It's always an attack on the schools. We have to control what the schools are teaching, right? Because that knowledge is everything. And one of the number one issues that, quite frankly, a lot of people in power have is that if students ever got the knowledge of some of the darkness of our past, it would lead to a lot of uncomfortable questions that they are not prepared to answer. If I am a 15-year-old student, talk about how recent everything is. The Reuben Stacy lynching that I mentioned, this is 1935. That is barely three generations ago. If I, in that picture, anybody who wants to look it up, obviously it's incredibly sensitive and brutal, but in the picture of Reuben's lynching, there is, families came out to see lynchings. There's a little girl, she can't be any more than 9 or 10, and she's looking up at the picture and she's kind of smiling at it. And you can only imagine what her dad and all the people in her life have said to her to make her look at a dying man hanging from a tree and smile at it, right? If that girl is 9 in 1935, by the time it's the civil rights movement, 1950s and 60s, she's in her 20s and 30s, right? So she's producing children who grow up in the 50s and 60s during the civil rights movement, who, fast forward 30 years, it's going to be the 1980s, which means they are producing children in the 70s and 80s who are growing up to be the parents of the kids that are walking the campuses today. That's it. That's how short it all is. Right? And so theoretically, not even theoretically, in reality, you have people who are living from, who are coming from families, children, students who are coming from families whose grandparents were alive and, quite frankly, maybe participants in some of this history that we're talking about. And when little Johnny learns about what that history is, little Johnny remembers, oh, Grandpa Joe was born in this time. I wonder if Grandpa Joe remembers. Yo, Grandpa Joe, I learned so and so and so. What do you know about it? This is an uncomfortable conversation. And so to deny that conversation completely, you just cut it completely off. And that's a big part of why this sort of whitewashing and denial is happening. The other part of it is what you're talking about. The youth have zero tolerance for BS. Right? Like, we both deal with students, and our, like, young people, when you start talking about injustice and this is what happened and this is breakdown and this is so on and this is how people are being screwed over, the anger is visceral, right? Like, they have zero tolerance for people being done wrong, right? And so, like, that triggers something, especially when you start talking about the power of collective action and the power of youth action. When you start breaking down how this entire civil rights movement is, like you said, student generated, essentially, there is power in that messaging that even at my age, I can be a change agent. And the powers that be who are comfortable with the status quo don't want those change agents built. And ultimately, that's what it is that you're talking about. This is the unfortunate reality of the situation. And one of the ways that you sort of deny all of this is by denying the access to the opportunities that can further build those change agents through DEI programming, right? How many of our schools of color are, even all of these years later, receiving substandard education? the money is not getting kicked to the schools. I'm at a school that's predominantly white. They just had 3 new buildings built in the last 15 years, 10 years, something like that. Meanwhile, pull up to the east side of our county where it's mostly black, and you got buildings that are completely dilapidated, auditoriums that can't be used, classrooms that when it rains an excessive amount and floods, it floods the entire first floor. That stuff is not happening out in the sticks. It's just not. The best teachers, the best equipment, the best technology. I was at a school a couple of years ago that had thousands, and I mean thousands, of laptops sitting in the closet collecting dust on standby. In case a student needed it, in case one broke down, in case one got a little scratch or a dent and we had to replace the whole thing. Thousands. And I do not make that as an exaggeration. This school had just dropped 100 grand on turf, grass. And I don't mean for the football field. I mean like to beautify the campus. $100,000 of money that was just sitting in their PTSA account that they had to use because it was just collecting dust. And so they dropped it on turf. Meanwhile, schools out east have classrooms that don't have air conditioners, right? Like, these are inequities now. And this is one of the frustrations that I have with people who don't understand what DEI is, the equity part of it. We're not talking about, oh, a black person coming in and taking your job and doing all of those things. That's not what's happening. There's a difference between equality and equity. And I think that's what they're forgetting or not knowing, right? What we are talking about is providing equitable access to things. Yes, any person can go to the University of Florida, to Harvard, whatever, black, white, purple, anybody can go there. But don't tell me that a student coming from the best rich white school out west has, or excuse me, that student has what the black student has to deal with, right? The black student is coming from all kinds of inequitable situations, from lack of technology to lack of quality teachers to lack of books to lack of programs. There are AP programs in black schools, not like there are in white, right? That's what DEI is supposed to address. But if we're not having these conversations, then what does it all mean?
Well, and I mean, I'm gonna go so far as to say that's what pro-life should address too.
Facts.
If you're pro-life, you got to be pro-life from the womb to the tomb.
Facts. Absolutely. And it goes to what we're talking about. There's a hypocrisy that people are comfortable with. Either they don't see it, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that you legitimately don't get, because sometimes you're blind to your own, biases, right? It is what it is. It's hard for people to turn that camera on selfie mode. I get it, right? So it's either a ignorance or a willfulness, but the hypocrisy is literally what you're talking about, what we're talking about.
Well, and it's also the preservation of power. I mean, I want to make because some people say, well, y'all not talking about the money. Follow the money. Okay, so we'll make space for that. It's for preservation of power, and it's also follow the money.
100%.
It's for the benefits of those who are in that interest, and I can give these contracts to cousins, friends, family members. That's all wrapped and tied into that, to a large extent as well. So
100.
I definitely want to make sure to invoke that as we talk about everything else, so that we do recognize it's an all-encompassing reason why that this is happening.
In America, money? No, those two are never connected. Yet 100%. Money makes this whole thing go round. And ironically and sadly, money was also the driver when a lot of these companies were pushing for DEI programming, 2 and 3 and 4 years ago, post George Floyd, right? They weren't doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They weren't doing it because they're, on some, we need to make things better and equal and all of that stuff. They saw where the tides were turning and they could make some money off of it. When Juneteenth became a holiday, one of the first things that Walmart did was try to monetize it. Let's sell Juneteenth this and Juneteenth that and Juneteenth shirts and Juneteenth ice cream and Juneteenth
Target as well.
Target as well. Like, let's call a spade a spade. So we are definitely on the same page. All of us in this conversation, we are definitely on the same page that the money is the motivator. You're talking about America. Money has been the motivator of everything, right?
So I'm glad you said that. Money has been the motivator of everything. I'm glad you said it, because one of the things that I think is very much so lost, when they decided to integrate, it was not because there was a change of heart.
Mm-hmm.
It was because there was a change in the increase on the amount of dollars they would be able to get.
Right.
I stand firmly on that. I am willing to die on that hill. And when you look at it and assess it, because I said that is so interesting when you talk about the economic stronghold of the African American community
Mm-hmm.
pre-integration and then post-integration,
Yes.
and the reasoning behind it. And you watch the dilapidation and disinvestment of the African American community, traditionally strong communities, and then you watch this increase and this climbing of other communities without us. And it's like, because now they said, well, let me think about this. If they sit at this lunch counter and they want to buy my coffee and they want to buy my burger, then I'm already making the money that I'm making now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a whole new investment in community. Look at these thousands of people out there that's saying we want to come into your place.
Right.
Well, why wouldn't I? Because then my salary increases, my household income increases. My kids are able to go on more vacations. My kids are able to go to more
Right.
of the best and brightest schools.
Right.
And then their kids have less because they're taking their money out of their community.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are we fighting against? Is prejudice and discrimination that important to us as to where we would stifle our own economic sustainability and progress? Let's have a huddle up. Let's have a conversation. I believe that was the backdoor conversation that ended up allowing them and letting them integrate the rest of the community. Because ever since then, that's what it's.
And it's what's really interesting about what you're saying is that in a way what's happening now is the actual reversal of that. You have, because you feel how you feel about, race and DI program and things like that, you have put in place an administration that really does not have any interest in your economic well-being, right? Like, one of the very first things that Trump has implemented, going even back to 2016, is tax cuts for the wealthy. They will say that, of course, it benefits middle, but obviously we know, like, that's, so you are willingly making that trade because this is the part, immigration, indeed, that's the part that you are, applauding. And so the irony of what you're saying, which is so true at the time, is that in a little bit of a way it's been reversed. This is interesting because this is one of those conversations that you're slowly starting to hear more and more people talk about when it comes to post-civil rights. Was integration, the way it went down, was it the win that people say it is, that history says it is, right? One of the things, for example, going to what it is that you're discussing, one of the ways that money was sort of drained from the black community, not just with the sitting at the lunch counter and ordering a hamburger, although, yeah, that's true, but it was also a brain drain. And that's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. When integration happened, true integration was not. True integration would have been, let's bring white students to black schools, black students to white, and let's really have an integration. That's not what went down, as we know, right?
It was a one-way street.
Exactly. It was a one-way street. Let me pluck the best and the brightest. You didn't go get Hood Tyrone, right? Like, you went and got the best and the brightest, plucked them from the top 10, 15, 20% of the black schools, and that's who you sent out west. Or that's who you sent to the white schools, right? And so literally it was a drain, it was a brain drain of our best and brightest to those areas. And now I'm being educated there. And I'm seeing how the other half lives, and I want more of that. And so when I go to college and I become the doctor and I do this and I do that, I don't bring it back to my community like I should. I go and stay out there, right? And so that, not just that hamburger has gone to the other side, but literally all the dollars that person would make with their education, and that would used to get fueled right back into Greenwood, right back into Mount Bayou, right back into those places. Those dollars from those professionals are now being sent elsewhere, and so that's a sort of perpetual economic drain from the black community.
And so I heard in two things. So about Martin Luther King said, to Harry Belafonte in a hotel room the night prior to his death. I fear I have integrated my people into a burning building, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then also I heard a local politician recently just make the comment that our HBCUs are sitting in communities across this country that have the largest dearth of investment, that are
Mm.
filled of dilapidation,
Mm-hmm.
people who are living up under the poverty level,
Yeah.
and that's the result of today.
Yeah.
However, its inception was not that. Its inception, when it was in these different communities where these were affluent black
Right.
communities in which these HBCUs were placed.
Right. And then that drain over the years has basically drained those communities, right? That's 100% what happened. 100% what happened. Again, when we talk, you know, DEI, when we talk about programming designed to make things equitable, like these are the conversations, again, that need to be had that aren't being had. You're talking about something that systemically sucked out, sucked away, not just our economic power, not just our sort of educational power, but our social power, our political power. A lot of these things have been drained from us for the last 50 years, 60, 100 years, right? Then on top of that, you add Jim Crow and all the other things that we, of course, know African Americans have gone through. This rabbit hole is so deep, so deep. And when you again cannot educate properly because laws are being constantly made to take away that proper education, what's the worst thing that someone can say when they do you wrong is to just ignore it, right? That's the worst thing that they can do, and that's essentially what's been happening, is that you have a population of people who are basically ignoring or trying to um so many deeply, deeply, deeply embedded problems. Racism is baked into the cake of this country. It just is. It just is. But if you say this in a classroom setting, then somehow you are promoting, indoctrination ideology, right? I'm promoting indoctrination ideology by saying that it's baked into the cake, but I also teach the three-fifths compromise. Literally a part of the Constitution. So
Right. Make
do
it make sense.
both. You can't do both. You can't have both. And it's just like that's the frustrating thing. And this is why programs like this and organizations like BHP, like, we're so critically important, but we're also a thorn in the side because it's that constant reminder of what it is that you're trying to hide. And if it wasn't so important, why are you working so hard to deny it?
100%, and that's why I say always, because people like to say, well, now you're just scapegoating, so where's the personal responsibility, where's the personal accountability at for what's going on? You blaming white folks and you want to be stuck in the past and not deal with the issues of
Mm-hmm.
today. And so I always start off my conversations semesters with let's give racism a percentage. You put whatever percentage is in it of to what contributes to our issues today. You cannot say that it's not there, because I love it when people say, "Oh, so now you want to now you want to pull a race
Race
card,"
card. Mm.
and it's like the best response I heard to that, well, you're the ones who put it in the deck.
Love it.
I won't pull it if it was never there.
Ra-
So, but for the sake of conversation, like I always say, okay, let's give racism a percentage. Is it 30% of the issue? Is it 50% of the issue? Because you can't say it's 0% of the issue.
Right.
You have to make, because of how the country was, the foundation of it. You have to bake, like you said, bake that in, and you have to account for it. So we're going to put that there, and you add whatever percentage that is there, because it's only the correct, logical thing to do based off of that history of it.
Yes.
And then you could talk about the personal accountability, responsibility of it, and things like that too. So I want to make sure that people understand that it's not the big bad boogeyman that's the 100% of the issue, but it's dang sure gonna get a percentage
Absolutely.
involved in this, and then we can also talk about everything else around
Absolutely. And to that end, and this is one of the things that I usually say, is that there is no problem this deeply embedded and this complex that does not have multiple causes, right? So yeah, you can go through African American history and find people from Du Bois to Washington to King to many people who will say that, black people need to do better, right? Like that is 100% the case. 100%. I think everybody who's a part of this conversation now owns that and knows that. But how is that different from any other community that exists, right? Pull up to West Virginia and stay there for 10 minutes. I'm just calling a spade a spade. It is what it is, right? So there is that component to it, but you cannot deny the policies and the programs that were put in place for so many years that have created the situation that we are in. You just simply can't deny it. And anybody, like you said, is not zero. Anybody who says otherwise or tries to, sanitize otherwise, then you're just not being honest with yourself. You cannot have one of the very first conversations that I have in my classroom, because we start the year in U.S. history in the state of Florida with the lead to the Civil War, cause of the Civil War. Can't talk about the cause of the Civil War without talking about enslavement. So literally one of the first conversations that comes out of our mouths as a class is slavery. Hell of a way to start the year, right? And so I start off by giving the students a math problem. I tell them to do 1865 minus 1619. Everybody in this chat, obviously, we're familiar with these years, right? The math of that comes out to, I want to say, 246 years or something like that. I then tell the students to do whatever the current year is. So 2023, 2024, 2025. So this year is 24. 2024 minus 1776. Obviously from today to the foundation of this country with the Declaration. And the math on that, I want to say, is 246 or 247 years.
Yep, depends on where you, because I do the same thing. So if you start off at 1787 or you start off at 1776, but
Right.
yeah, it's gonna be roughly.
And I'll even give them the 11 years. I know the articles didn't work out, so they went to the Constitution. I'll give you that, right? So you're talking about enslavement lasting in this country for as long as the nation itself has been in existence, from George, and I say to the students, I say from George Washington and all the powder wig people, from George Washington to you sitting in the chair right now, is how long slavery lasted. And that's just slavery. That's not even including the next 100 years of Jim Crow. That's not including the next 100 years of lynching and murder and segregation and denial of every opportunity, education and housing and healthcare, and go on forever, right? That's not including the next 100 years. So now you're talking close to 350 years. 350 years in which blacks are either legally enslaved or legally treated as second-class citizens. And so I give them another math problem. 1607, which of course, foundation of Jamestown. So the very first thing of any kind that will eventually become the United States of America, to 2024 again, 2023, 2025, whatever. And so the math on that is like 417, 418 years, whatever it is, 420 years. So if we are to measure the Jim Crow period from the beginnings of black codes, basically Reconstruction, until the passing of the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act, which officially sort of ends the legalization of certain Jim Crow laws. That is 350 divided into 417. It gives them a percentage. The percentage is 83% or something like that, depending on the year, 82, 83, 84%. So what all of this means is that for 83% of the entire existence of anything that even looked like America, anything that would eventually become America, not just the United States, anything that would even become the United States, for 83% of that history, African Americans are either legally enslaved or legally treated as second-class citizens. You tell me anything in life that happens for 83% of the time, and that thing is not a major part of that issue. Anything. If you, any individual, and I tell the students this, if any individual person did a thing for 83% of their existence, that thing is with you. These are the that's my frustration. This is the conversation that just is not had and can't be had. People, to a man, do not know even the beginnings of the depths of racism in this country. Though these kind of conversations, that math problem, if you lined up 100 Americans, 98 of them would not have ever heard that, thought that, been told that, taught that. And how can you have a country that truly promotes and pushes and supports diversity, equity, inclusion when they think the problem is not 83% of its history? That's the problem that we're running into. Can't be honest with yourself if you can't be taught facts.
That's real. Like that's where we are right now, where people are now trying to massage the facts and reconstruct the facts and suggest that, oh, slavery was good and beneficial for African Americans.
What do you do with this, man? What do you do with this? And it's interesting that you say that too, because I know that caught the attention. I know we're kind of going off because DEI is our conversation, but this is a part of it as well, right? Like, this is one of the issues. One of my favorite quotes of all time. Probably my favorite quote of all time. Brother Malcolm: "Only a fool would let his enemy teach his children." And I don't say that in any kind of rude or disrespectful or racist way. I say that as this is the problem. This is how you get phrases like slavery is beneficial. That's where it comes from, right? You are having people who they themselves were not properly taught, creating laws to teach that improper education to our children. Their children are being taught, but by way of that, our children are being taught, because a lot of us, are really sort of still starving for that knowledge. We can't correct it. Again, one of the reasons why projects or programs like the BHP is so important, right? One of my issues, and this didn't get talked about when that whole controversy came out. Everyone focused on the slavery was beneficial, but when you actually look at the standards that they released in Florida, the African American history standards, the standards themselves, the very beginning of it, starts from enslavement. Now, anybody who teaches any African American studies course, or anybody who has ever had any African American studies course, or hopefully should know, that the very first thing that you learn is that you don't start our history with chains. Because our history doesn't start with chains. You're talking about a long and rich and deep history way before the boats came. A history of African contribution to the world, that the world would not be what it is without those contributions. And none of that is included in the standards. Still, to this day, none of that is included in the standards. So I get everyone's frustration with the slavery is beneficial, and I was frustrated with everyone else. But my mind was there. Where the hell are the standards pre-enslavement, pre-Columbian? That's unacceptable under any circumstances. And so, like, this, again, that's the miseducation that we're talking about. Everything stems from that. And part of it, I know, is the educator in me, but part of it is just that's the reality of it. You cannot create a society that benefits everyone when you have an education system that has clearly made a mission of promoting history that does not celebrate everyone. Because now you think that not everyone is equally to be benefited. Right? Like, that's the issue that we're running into.
And when you just only tell one side of the story, like I always like to, we always hear about the slavery aspect of it too, but I always ask, well, were there any free African Americans in the country?
Right.
Was everybody enslaved?
Right.
Because I hear that part of the narrative too. Everybody
Right.
wasn't okay. Well, in
Right.
the curriculum, I don't hear anything about this. I don't hear about Benjamin Banneker and what he
Right.
did.
Right.
I don't hear about the inventions that were occurring at that time.
Right.
I don't hear about the free African society. Richard Allen, Absalom Jones up in Philadelphia created the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is still
Mm-hmm.
around today, where they are advocating for abolitionism. They are advocating for education. They are advocating and writing some of the most, I want to say, romantic documents
Yes.
talking about liberation
Yes.
and what humanity actually means,
Yes.
and really calling America and putting America's feet to the fire
Yes.
on the hypocrisy that exists and why it exists, and then touching on some of their philosophers that they look to. Well,
Right.
you have John Locke, who's talking about life, liberty, and property. And they're invoking these people in these conversations. And so you get this remixing and misunderstanding of history. Just like I asked the students, well, were there more free African Americans in the North or the South? And everybody says, what? The North. There were 32,000 more free Africans in the South. We don't hear about that. We don't hear about the Underground Railroad that went south.
Right. Exactly.
Out there in Florida, over there at Fort Mose. We don't hear about that. So we don't hear about it going to Mexico. We have the whole conversation about immigration right now.
Right.
We don't hear about the 200,000 Africans that went directly from the continent to Mexico. And then those who also escaped.
And what's interesting about it, particularly with there's again so much of what you say is so profound. The Underground Railroad conversation, what you just said, it reminds me of a conversation that I had with my students when we were, again, Unit 1, learning about enslavement and the Underground Railroad. And I explained to them exactly what you're talking about, that the Underground Railroad literally went in all directions. I showed them a map of all the arrows going to just all the places. And I was like, look, I don't even have to, get educational with you, bro. Common freaking sense. If I'm an enslaved person, I'm not going to the North. I'm going to the nearest place that don't got slavery.
Not if you in South. If you in South Carolina, you going south.
You get what I'm saying? You want me, if I'm an enslaved person in the deep freaking South, you want me in Alabama. I got to go through all of Alabama, all the way through Tennessee, all the way through Kentucky, on foot, by the way, just to get to Ohio. Meanwhile, Florida's a hop, skip, and a jump. What are we doing? Just common sense. And so it goes literally to what you're saying, just the manner in which everything is taught, creating a diverse perspective and creating a diverse understanding of what we're talking about. The inventions that you mentioned, I encourage everyone who's listening in, especially anybody who's an educator, an activity that I do this in class, and I also do it as a part of my my Black Student Union. It's a really cool activity. I call it a day in the life without. Concept of it is to...
I'm on that too.
Okay,
Yes.
Concept of it, ladies and gentlemen, is to see if students can live a single day, one single day, without using any single invention made by a Black individual. One single day, to see if they can use any invention that does not have Black fingerprints on it. Do that as a lesson, and you would be amazed. First of all, just the perspective sort of changing mindset that students have, because they obviously don't have any kind of understanding or background of just everything that African Americans have created in this country. And not only that, but just to see just the daily impact. So we're not talking like these abstract things, right? I'm talking about things that make a daily impact on your life. And these things are touched by Black hands. This entire nation would be completely different and way less than it is without its Black population. And it's activities like that showcase that. And it's furthermore why we need to do more right by these people that have contributed everything to this country and really have gotten very little in return than we have been doing.
Well, every group, I'm going to use the phrase, but I know it's charged right now. Every group has gotten reparations except for African Americans.
It's real.
Every group has gotten reparations. So, and even however you try to figure out how to divvy that up, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying every group that has been wronged in America, they have found a way to give reparations.
And that includes enslavers.
Confederate soldiers.
You
Andrew
get what I'm
Johnson
saying?
comes
Come
in,
on.
wipes out the 40 acres and a mule. 40 acres and a mule, but it's deeper than the music. I don't know if people did their research after the Kendrick Lamar halftime
Yeah,
show.
let's go.
400,000 acres divvied up. That was between South Carolina, Georgia, and I think a part and portion of Florida out there by St. John's River.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all of that's given to them, and people say, well, they gave that to them, or that's what Where did that come from? It came from because William T. Sherman asked
Right.
Black Americans, what is it that you want
Yep.
or think that you need to realize your true freedoms? Because you could be free in words, but if you're not free in resources,
Right.
it really means nothing.
Right.
I think his name Garrison Frazier goes back to the community. He's a renowned preacher. Goes back to the community and he says, "Hey, I had this question. There are other reverends and pastors, other community members. They have a discussion. They land on them wanting land."
Right.
And the reason they said that is because they said, this is the thing that I can actually use my own hands to cultivate my own life by tilling to these fields. So land makes the most sense. They get special field order number 15. They get it. What happens? Lincoln gets assassinated. Andrew Johnson comes in, redistributes all of that land that was carved out for those free Black Americans as he kicks out the Freedmen's Bureau. And they give that land back to the treasonous Confederates.
Right.
And that's how the Confederates get the land, how Black people get nothing, and you get sharecropping.
And so picture this, ladies and gentlemen. AK laid out the history perfectly. Picture you have a group of people who literally broke themselves away from the country and shot and killed more American soldiers than any other enemy that America's ever had. More American soldiers died at the hands of the Confederacy than at the hands of any other enemy that America's ever had. More American soldiers are killed by the Confederates than by the Nazis, than by Vietnam, than by Japan, by Spain, by Afghanistan, by Al Qaeda, Islamic terrorists. More are killed by the Confederates than all of them. And those are the people who got their land right back the second that Lincoln was killed. After that order gets passed, they have to now go back to those former enslaved people and tell them, yeah, remember that, land grant, order 15 that sorry, my bad, takesy backsies. And so now they send Oliver Howard back down south and like, yo, we actually need that land back. Sorry, you got to get up off of it. And obviously it's creating all kinds of turmoil and confusion, and people are like, what's going on, and so on and so forth, because AK said it perfectly. Who knows better about how to till this land and make it valuable than the people who have been doing it for free their entire lives? Except now the money, instead of going into Master Johnson's pocket, it can go into my own. So this can literally build. Even then, the very first idea that blacks had post-slavery, not even post-slavery, because technically the war was still going on when Sherman went down there. So the very first idea that they have is building generational wealth. That's the very first concept, now that blacks are about to be free, that they land on. So you can tell the importance of it, right? Now you're going and telling them that, yeah, we're going to take that generational wealth away from you. And so when Howard goes down there and he has to deliver this news, obviously people are upset, angry, whatever. And Howard gives the order, like it's starting to become kind of, problematic. Maybe they might riot. Who knows what these people are going to do? They're upset, and rightfully so. Howard gives the order to one of the local black people to order what was in the documents called a sweet-voiced Negro woman to basically sing to them. And I forget what I think she's saying, nobody knows the trouble. I think that's what it was that she's saying. And it sort of calmed the crowd down, hearing her sing. And then Howard was like, okay, we have to sort of work with this. And then he begins to actually talk with them. But it just goes to what it is that you're talking about, this idea the wealth of America and money being the thing that makes America go. And the only people who are being denied it are the people who literally built this country. You give them an opportunity to be free, and the very first thing that they ask is for a piece of that pie. And you give it to them for 5 seconds just to take it right back.
Oh, and to add insult to injury, they then institute the black codes and then put them in prisons or on a chain gang for vagrancy laws
Right.
because they don't have any employment.
Right.
So then they say, well, this very land that you're given, I know you have nowhere to go. I got a little house right there for you. Here's some seed. Here's some tools. You can use this because I know how important land was to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the harvest, you pay me back a little bit of what you gave me. And then you divvy up and take whatever's left. But what I didn't tell you is that I gave you bad seed
Right.
that I know wasn't going to grow. So now you're even more so in debt because you've been staying here. And then what also, with you not having a job, being unemployed, well, I'm throwing you in a prison for that.
Right.
Then I'm going to contract you out to other people and other businesses. I'm going to insure you through the bank, which is how we started getting bankings and how we started getting insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Insure you through the bank because we're still talking about money. So now you're going to make me even more money because I have insurance on you. I also have you working, doing sharecropping,
Right.
and you can't leave until you pay me. And if you pay me, if you leave and you owe me, then we still gonna throw you in prison, and we're gonna contract that out. So, and
And
then
oh, by
when
the
you get into
way,
the value of a black body,
right.
That's a whole nother thing as well too.
And oh, by the way, that's all 40, 50 years after enslavement. So when we talk reparations and where people are like, oh, slavery's 150 years ago, except nope, sorry, it's not. Again, lack of education, lack of proper presentation of this information to our generations. This is not even something, like you're talking about something that convict leasing was a thing when Dr. King was alive, right? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, this is not Frederick Douglass type stuff. This is not Harriet Tubman, old, slave master type stuff. Like, this is something that we are well into the 20th century still experiencing.
I mean, Victoria's Secret, Starbucks, Walmart, IBM. We want to talk about what's going on right now today. We had a 13 documentary came out on Netflix, and prison populations are making these very products that we use every single day today and getting paid pennies for what the average employee in main society is actually getting paid.
Right.
So there's a form of it still occurring today where these large businesses are using prison labor because they're being able to pay them cents to cultivate, build their products, and those very products that make them millions that are shipped and used all throughout America. But yet when a person comes out of prison, they can't get a job at them very companies that they were already working for.
Right. And to that end, speaking of which, without going way off on the deep end with it, here we go again with that conversation of personal responsibility versus systemic, right? So, yeah, personal responsibility, absolutely a part of it. But then here we are with the systemic nature of it. We're talking 1970s and 80s, so we are even past the civil rights movement, and your prison population is climbing higher and higher because of this BS drug war in which you are intentionally felonizing blacks for drug crimes and giving whites a slap on the wrist, 100 to 1s, right? Mandatory minimums, things like that. You're literally destroying the black community and then turning around and asking, why is the black community so messed up? You're literally arresting fathers and brothers and sons and uncles and cousins and then turning around and asking, well, why aren't there more black fathers in the home? Like, you can't do both. You can't be both. You can't say both. And that's my issue that people have, is that they want to rush to the end of, okay, well, personal responsibility and this and that. And this is why we don't need DEI. Black people just, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but then completely ignore the 83% that we talked about earlier. That 83%, by the way, does not include mass incarceration. That 83% stops at 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. It does not include the next 40 years of New Jim Crow. So what are we really talking about? What conversation are we really having?
So and even to round this conversation out, because we can keep going on and on about this, right? So we highlight what the issues are, and I think it's important, right? Because you have to battle you have to have these battles, approach these battles on multiple fronts. So,
Right.
if anything from our culture, our people, we know about guerrilla warfare,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can't fight your enemy straight up if your enemy is much more powerful than you. So
For
you got
sure.
to attack them from different fronts.
For sure.
And so, as we talk about and highlight what the issues are, then also what are some of those solutions to
Mm-hmm.
tackling DEI?
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of those are focusing on things that we very much so need. I talked about in the last video that I did, independent healthcare facilities, independent manufacturing and distribution centers, independent financial institutions, independent grocery stores with affordable products. That investment to create the very thing that we need,
Right.
I think, is one of those solutions to tackling this threat of DEI, because they can't take for you what you already own and what you already have.
100%. You absolutely nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. That was going to be my answer. And it goes to what we talked about before. You mentioned it perfectly with Greenwood, with our Black Wall Streets, with Mount Bayou, with Overtown, which is down here in Miami, which was our Black Wall Street, and they built 95 through it, right? Um, those we understood even then that the buildup of independent wealth independent of the system, can be managed by us and passed down generationally in a way that the system won't allow us to do if we are integrated with the system. And this is not advocating going back to segregation. This is advocating black owned, right? Like we can be within the system, but still be an independent portion of it. And I think, quite frankly, that I don't want to say the only, but I think that is the primary way that we reclaim what's ours, is by literally doing just that, reclaiming what's ours, going back to our birthright. Black Wall Street was a birthright of ours, right? Like that was something we created from nothing because we had nothing, because they gave us nothing, and so we had to create it ourselves. And as we said with integration, this is that question of solutions is literally tying everything together, stitching it all together, that we talked about this entire time, right? The independence of the black community of 50, 100 years ago through necessity, we can do ourselves through like togetherness. Like this is our fight of bringing everything back together, creating those independent educational institutions, creating those independent grocery stores. But I was talking with my dad, maybe it was last week, a couple weeks ago, whatever it was. Bro, I'm running out of places to shop. I'm trying to, do right by, okay, you don't want to support DEI programming, so I'm going to boycott you. But, bro, they took away my Publix, they took away my Sam's, they took away my Walmart. Bro, like, I'm going to have to go back to oxen and planting my corn seeds in the ground, bro. Like, I don't know. I'm running out of places to shop. And the more I'm thinking about it, I'm like, where's the black-owned grocery store? Where's the black-owned grocery store that we know is going to serve us proper food, healthy food, at reasonable price? Like, where is that institution? Black banks. You're starting to see a couple of things get developed, but like more of that economic investment within self that we used to do and then got away from. A return to that is so necessary right now. And I think it all starts with the mindset. I think the African American community has to be so sufficiently turned off with everything that is being done to them that it brings a sort of unity to that community and an investment, knowing that we only have ourselves type deal. I don't know if we're there quite yet, but I see us getting there. I see the buildup of the frustration. Ironically, the more this administration does to specifically target us, I think the more it's going to unite us, because the more it's going to anger us. And that's one of the common things that the black community has always done historically. When we get angry, we move on it. And I think that we're starting to see that develop, the seeds of it develop. In another couple of years, I think those seeds are going to grow.
and I'll bring this out too because I think it's important for us to see it and really understand the numbers so that we have a comparison of where we're at to understand where we need to go. And so, black people, we have businesses, right? But the issue is that they're sole proprietorships and they have no W-2 employees.
Right.
So a lot of people are able to say, "Oh, I own my own business."
Right.
And it's like, well, how many employees do you have? Oh, I don't have any. So it's like, well, you have a very glorified job at that point. And
Real.
understanding that black-owned businesses employ 1.4 million workers in this country as of 2021, with 53.6 billion in payroll. For comparison, white-owned businesses employ 104 million people, and they have an annual payroll of $6.3 trillion. And Hispanics employ 3 million people with an annual payroll of $124.4 billion. So you put that into a context to show, well, how much we need to create more of our own businesses. And I don't think that it's a negative thing to say that, right? Because if we look at Malcolm X said, one of the most important things for you to do is to study what other people are doing. And I'm paraphrasing because that's from out the quote of what is it? Of all of our like actions and activities, it's research that will be best rewarded, right? And I'm messing up that quote, but essentially in that quote, he's also saying when you see what other people are doing correct, you look to them and you do what they do because you'll know what it is that you should do.
Right.
And so when you look at other minorities, they have these businesses, and they actually have businesses and products and things that we support. You talk about the Vietnamese in hair. You talk about going and get the nails done.
Right.
You know.
Right.
You talk about food. When you look at the Hispanic restaurants, they're employing other Hispanics in there. You don't really see African Americans working, especially not waiting tables at Hispanic restaurants.
That's real.
Call a spade a spade.
That's real.
Chinese restaurants. So we have too many examples as to where other minority groups get it. I mean, you talk about the gas stations, whether they be the Indians or the Arabics who are coming in and running these gas stations. So having business and doing business in community is already a model for our community.
Right.
But we are only the ones on the other receiving end of it, where we are the consumers of all these other ethnicities doing business in our community.
Yes.
However, you cannot go into their communities and sell their products to them. No African American is going to start a Chinese restaurant and go in Chinatown and sell Chinese food to them.
Right.
I'm willing to probably be wrong about that, but an exception does not negate the rule.
You're not. And that's and it is not even. I'll take it a step further. It's not even a Black American opening a Chinese restaurant. You're not going to see a Black person open a soul food restaurant in, Richville, whatever area you live in, the wealthy part of that town, right? Like, people in that area are going to be the ones running the business for that area. But as you're saying, you have in the Black community all kinds of people coming in from the outside, opening up businesses within that Black community. You are not going to see any kind of, Black proprietor opening a restaurant or a Whole Foods or something like that in the rich white neighborhood, right? And okay, fine, that is what it is. But then those other groups that are coming into the Black neighborhoods, I'm not saying that can't happen, but we got to do better with that. And I think that's what the statistics that you brought up, that's what that points out. We have to do more right by ourselves. And honestly, that's a part of that personal responsibility as well. Not in that, pull us by your bootstraps type thing, but owing more to ourselves is also personal responsibility. Like, we owe ourselves more than we are giving ourselves, I think, as a people. And
we're the culture. We're the culture.
100%.
People follow what we do.
100%.
We use the terminology that we do. So we set the stage and set the tone for so many different people when it comes to the entertainment aspects and what's cool. I mean, you're looking at food. If you talk to Cuba and look at the history of Cuba, there's a very good documentary called Cuba Libre. It opens up on the first episode and says Africans are responsible for the rice, the beans, and our music. Like, that's where we get that from. Like our food, our dancing, our
Yes,
music
everything.
comes from the root of Africa, and people say that 1,000 times over about other things too. When you look at Asians, Asians are now breakdancing and they love Jordans. There's a documentary about Asians and being sneakerheads, and they love
Really?
copping Jordans and copping shoes. So all of this stuff is emanating from black culture. You look at Asians now; they doing drill rap as well. Like I said, it's all over the world. The influence of African Americans. So
And,
we need to recognize that.
and while recognizing that, perfect, literally the perfect segue to the shirt. While recognizing that, also recognizing that we people, that black culture that you love, I need you to love us the way you love that culture. I need that to happen. And there was a
But they say they love our rhythm and not our blues.
yeah, there it is. And there was a time that the, I don't want to say the plight, but the cause of Black America was more universal than it was. Was more universal than it was. I came across. I was reading. Oh, I forgot what I was reading. It was like a month ago, and it was talking about the connection between Ho Chi Minh and the Black Panthers, and how Ho Chi Minh comes and he sort of sees the plight of Black America and actually writes about it and so on and so forth. And it goes to what we've been talking about. We will fight America's wars. We will make America's music. We will cook for America, all the food and the rap and all these things. We will do all of these things for America. But then there are people who are like, yo, how can you do this with a country that has historically hated your guts? Like, it does not make sense, right? And so, like, that's also that needs to be a part of this as well. I love that we put out the culture. I love that there is no American culture without Black American culture, right? Like, one of our original founding musics is Black created, ragtime and jazz, right? So, like, it does not exist. Again, not on some woke nonsense. This is just the historical facts. It is what it is. Ragtime is the first truly American music form leading to jazz, and all of it was Black created. Okay? Before that, y'all was importing freaking Brahms and Beethoven. There. Oh, you gotta send that to me. Please send that to me, brother. Yes,
I got it right here
please.
from the start to it was a part of
Yes,
an exhibition
indeed.
series. Lady came in, the whole how it influences all forms. You see the arrows going into it.
Yes,
Yeah.
I need that. It's interesting that you show that because one of the things that our Black Student Union is doing next Friday, we're doing our annual, what we call the Arts Expo. And what we do is we partner with different like organizations in the school. So we partner with the art club. We partner with the ELA department, English department, or whatever, and we have like student created performances. Right, we do a catered dinner. Last year we did like Dutch pot. And at the catered dinner, we have like a art studio. We turn the cafeteria into like an art studio where we bring in art pieces that the students created. And at the end of the evening, we do a showcase performance where whatever the theme is this for the year, we tell the story of that topic and then intermix with the narration our actual showcase performances. So we do dance numbers and poetry and all kinds of great stuff. This year's theme, of course, is the Harlem Renaissance. And so, obviously, one of the things that we're talking about is the growth of Black culture and the impact that it has on America, including the music of it. And so, that would be perfect as a part of the program that we're trying to put together. But there we go again with that. Like, that's America in a nutshell. You're talking about a population of people that has never maxed out any higher than 14, 13%, that has had such a critical impact on every aspect of this country's history. There's nothing about this nation that would be anything close to what it currently is if it wasn't for the Black population. And that population did that while being screwed over and discriminated against every single step of the way. Do better by those people. Do right by them. Because they have done right for you for 400 years. That's it. That's all African Americans have ever asked. Do right by us.
And I think that that's a perfect way to close out this dynamic discussion. And I definitely want to say thank you for your time. It was a gift to be able to build with you, and
Brothers,
have this
man.
conversation with you for sure, for sure. So I definitely appreciate you. And it's like you always you're looking for your home, right? And you find your people when you're doing what you're supposed to do. So I
No
definitely
doubt.
want to say thank you for sure for this conversation.
AK, brother, I appreciate you, man, for hosting this, for doing this. This is exactly what we need. And everybody who came through, watched us, I appreciate you guys. Keep the fight, keep the struggle. We are but a link in a chain. And I tell this to my students all the time. This is our fight. This is our generation's fight, right? From, as I said, how you can draw a direct line from lost cause to anti-civil rights to anti-CRT. You can also draw a direct line from Nat Turner to Marcus Garvey to Martin and Malcolm to us. This is our fight.
Absolutely. And so, with that, if you weren't able to join us for the live, we will have this posted on several different platforms. Give us some time to do some editing. You'll see some clips from out of here, so that you will have an opportunity to click on that link and go watch the whole entire conversation. Look, I'm going to tell y'all this little secret. I talked about 30 minutes. We had 2 hours. so definitely, it was a very powerful conversation. I think we touched on a lot of highlights.
Yes.
So again, we are with the Black History Project. So please follow us on Instagram, Black History Project Inc. We also are releasing a YouTube page as well, where this whole entire conversation will be posted. So look for us, look for more. We're gonna have some more conversations in the future. We definitely gonna hear from Kevin again sooner than later for sure. And I look forward to you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Everybody have a good night.
Hey,
Peace.
appreciate you, Kay. Appreciate you guys. Have a good night, everyone.